He sat in a leather chair that cost more than most people's houses, waiting for the headmaster to tell him something he already knew. The mahogany desk between them gleamed under soft lighting, the kind of office designed to make you feel small, even when you had billions in the bank. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the private school's manicured grounds stretched endlessly, each blade of grass cut to geometric perfection. The tuition alone was $200,000 a year. But tuition was never the real expense. The headmaster opened a folder with the careful deliberation of someone about to deliver bad news for the 100th time in his career. 30 years at the helm of one of the nation's most exclusive institutions had given him the practiced sympathy of a man who'd learned exactly which facial expression worked best in situations like this. His fingers tapped the edge of a stack of examination papers, all marked with red ink, all falling short. "Mr. Grant," he began, his voice measured and professional, "I've taught at this school for 3 decades. I've worked with students from the most prominent families in the country, senators' children, CEOs' heirs, tech billionaires' offspring. I've never seen a student with access to what your daughter has access to struggle the way she does." The papers slid across the desk one by one. Failed algebra exam, incomplete literature assignment, chemistry test, 42%. Below each score, comments from teachers who sounded increasingly exhausted. "Needs to focus more. Shows minimal effort. Difficult to engage in class discussion." The pattern was unmistakable. The girl was drowning, and all the life rafts in the world hadn't saved her yet. What made it worse, what made it unbearable, was that her father had purchased the entire fleet. He didn't say this out loud, but it hung in the air between them like smoke. $50,000 a week for a tutor from Oxford, a man with credentials thick as a dictionary and a track record of turning struggling students into academic superstars. The tutor had worked with royalty, or so his portfolio claimed. Before that, there was the Swiss Learning Institute, $200,000 for a summer program that promised to rewire cognitive structures for maximum educational potential. And before that, private jets ferrying her to specialists in Boston, educators in California, programs in Toronto and Vancouver, each expense justified by hope, each expense a brick in a wall that never quite closed. The math was simple when you had unlimited capital. Success was just a matter of finding the right price tag, right? Except the equation wasn't working. For the first time in his life, a problem had walked into his office that couldn't be solved by throwing money at it until it surrendered. He'd built his empire on solving problems. His first venture had failed because he'd underfunded it. His second had succeeded because he'd overfunded it. He'd learned early that capital was the solution to almost everything, the solution to time, to mediocrity, to competition, to failure itself. Money was the skeleton key that opened every door. Except, apparently, this one. "I need to ask you something," he said, leaning forward slightly, "and I want you to be completely honest with me. Is this a matter of intelligence? Is there something I should know about her potential?" The headmaster's pause was measured, professional. "No, sir. Your daughter is perfectly intelligent. She's creative. She has insights and discussions when she chooses to participate. She's kind to other students, genuinely kind, which is rarer than you'd think at this age. But intelligence and academic success aren't the same thing. Sometimes there's a gap between the two, and that gap is where students like your daughter get lost." The room felt smaller suddenly. "So what you're telling me is that no amount of—" He didn't finish the sentence, but the question was already asked. No amount of what? Investment, intervention, expertise? In the private equity world, there were always resources you hadn't tapped yet, always a fund that hadn't been accessed, always someone smarter than the last person you hired. But he could see it now, could see the moment when the headmaster had realized the same thing he was just beginning to understand. They'd run out of solutions. They'd run out of experts. They'd run out of places to spend money. The headmaster stood, which signaled that the meeting was over. There was nothing more to discuss, no new program to implement, no fresh specialist to fly in, just the reality of a situation that had exhausted itself. He walked out of that office and stood in the hallway of the school, surrounded by the photographs of graduates who'd gone on to Ivy League universities. Rows and rows of smiling faces frozen in their triumph. Future senators and CEOs and venture capitalists, all of them staring at him with the confidence of people who'd won at this game. And his daughter's photo wasn't going to join them, not because she wasn't capable, but because nobody had figured out how to unlock whatever was preventing her from seeing her own capabilities. That night, he sat in his penthouse office. The city lights stretched out below him like a circuit board. Floor-to-ceiling windows displayed his dominance over the landscape. Everything about this space screamed control, mastery, the tangible fruits of unbending will. On his desk was an invoice for the Oxford tutors' next month of services, another $50,000. His signature was already poised over the transfer authorization. Instead of signing, he closed the laptop. The decision came not as a moment of clarity, but as a moment of capitulation. Somewhere between the cost spreadsheets and the failed exam papers and the photos of all those successful graduates, he realized something that no business seminar or entrepreneurship podcast had ever prepared him for. There were things in this world that money made worse, not better. There were problems that couldn't be solved by escalation. There were situations where throwing more resources at the issue didn't expand your options. It narrowed them, funneling you deeper into a false direction. He'd spent $3.2 million in a single year trying to fix his daughter. And the only thing he'd fixed was his own blind spot about what fixing actually meant. The next day, when she came home from school, he called her into his study. The room was deliberately designed to intimidate. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, original artwork on the walls, the kind of space that whispered power. She walked in with the guardedness of a teenager who'd learned to brace herself for the next program, the next intervention, the next expensive attempt to transform her into someone else. But instead of a lecture or an announcement of a new specialist, he simply looked at her and said the words he never thought a self-made billionaire would ever say. "I'm going to stop." She froze. Stop? What? All of it. The tutors, the programs, the jets to summer camps for learning seminars. I'm going to stop trying to fix you because I've realized there's nothing broken here that needs fixing. You're not the problem. My approach was the problem. She stood in his office, and for the first time in years, tears actually came to her eyes. Not tears of frustration or anxiety about another program, but tears of relief, of being seen, of being heard say the things she'd probably been thinking the entire time. That maybe, just maybe, all of this wasn't about her intelligence at all. Maybe it was about her father finally understanding that love wasn't always measured in zeros on a check. 3 months passed. 3 months of normal school days, normal homework, normal life without consultants and specialists, and $500,000 summer interventions. 3 months of his daughter simply existing without the weight of his empire's expectations crushing down on her shoulders. Then came the phone call that changed everything. The headmaster's voice was different this time. Lighter, almost confused. "Mr. Grant, I'm calling with good news. Actually, extraordinary news. Your daughter's grades have improved dramatically. In fact, she's showing some of the fastest academic improvement we've seen in the entire school. Her math teacher is baffled. Her literature scores have jumped 40%. Whatever you're doing differently, it's working beyond anything we could have hoped for." He felt his stomach drop. Because he wasn't doing anything. That was the point. He'd stopped doing everything, so the improvement couldn't be coming from him, which meant it was coming from somewhere else entirely, somewhere he had no idea about. And as he hung up the phone and thought about his daughter's sudden unexplained transformation, the first question that formed in his mind wasn't pride or curiosity or paternal satisfaction. It was fear. Deep, primal fear about what exactly was happening in his daughter's life that he knew nothing about. What was she hiding from him? Who was she spending time with? And most importantly, was this a miracle, or was it the beginning of something that was going to break his heart all over again? What if the solution to your biggest problem had been hiding in plain sight the entire time, but not where you ever thought to look? Nasru. But here's what nobody tells you about abandoning control. Sometimes the moment you let go is the exact moment when everything you fear starts to happen. He didn't sleep that night, not because of excitement, not because of pride, but because of a growing, gnawing anxiety that crept through his mind like a virus spreading through a network. His daughter had improved 40% in her grades. 40% in 3 months, after years of plateauing despite millions in intervention, and he had absolutely no idea how it happened. The headmaster had been clear. They weren't giving her extra lessons. There was no hidden tutoring program at the school. No special program had been activated. She wasn't taking pills. Her schedule hadn't changed. Everything was exactly the same as it had been. Except everything had changed. When she came home that afternoon, he watched her carefully. She moved through the penthouse with the same casual grace she always did, dropping her backpack by the kitchen island, pulling an apple from the bowl. Normal. Everything about her seemed normal. But normal was the problem now. Normal was the thing that didn't make sense. He tested her casually over dinner. "So, school was good today?" She shrugged, not looking up from her plate. "Yeah, fine. Math class?" "Mm-hmm." The non-committal responses of a teenager talking to a parent, nothing suspicious, nothing revealing, just the standard monosyllabic stonewalling that all teenagers had perfected by her age. But he'd spent his entire career reading between lines, interpreting silences, finding the hidden truth beneath the surface of what people were saying. And his instincts, the same instincts that had made him billions, were screaming that his daughter was hiding something. Over the next week, he became a different kind of billionaire, not the philanthropic one, not the visionary entrepreneur, but the paranoid kind, the obsessive kind, the kind that starts keeping spreadsheets of his daughter's schedule the way he kept spreadsheets of his investment portfolio. She left school at 3:15, always, never 3:10, never 3:20, 3:15. She arrived home around 6 o'clock, a 2 hours and 45-minute gap. Her phone showed she wasn't at the mall. He'd checked the location data. She wasn't with her friends. He'd subtly verified that by calling one of their parents. She wasn't at a second tutoring program. He'd already called every educational institute in the city under the pretense of inquiry. Where was she? The obsession grew. He found himself checking her location on his phone every hour. He checked it the way other men check stock prices, the way addicts check their supplies, the way the paranoid check their locks. His assistant started noticing his divided attention in meetings, his business calls that trailed off mid-sentence, the way he'd suddenly look at his phone and lose his train of thought entirely. Then came Friday. He decided to follow her. The decision crystallized quietly, without the sound of breaking glass, but with all the impact of crossing a line that he knew, even in the moment of crossing it, he shouldn't cross. This was surveillance. This was the exact kind of invasive parenting that therapists wrote books about. This was the kind of behavior that destroyed trust if it was ever discovered. But the not knowing had become unbearable. The mystery had metastasized from curiosity into something darker, something that needed to be solved. He sat in his car in the school parking lot at 3 o'clock that Friday afternoon, feeling like a man in a noir film, a billionaire reduced to this, waiting, watching, playing the role of detective in his own daughter's life. He'd worn darker clothes intentionally, sunglasses, the wardrobe of someone trying to be invisible, which was absurd because his car was a custom Mercedes worth more than most houses, and he stood out like a diamond in a pile of rocks wherever he went. But the costume helped him feel justified in what he was doing, as if the sunglasses transformed surveillance into something acceptable. When she emerged from the school building, he started the engine. She walked toward the parking lot, toward the car he'd given her for her 16th birthday, a sleek Tesla, the kind of gift that was supposed to communicate that he understood her, that he trusted her, that he knew her tastes. She got in and pulled out. He followed at a careful distance, his heart hammering in his chest like a man about to discover something that would shatter his world. This was the moment where you either find out the truth you've been searching for, or you find out something worse than you were prepared for. He was about to enter the territory where billionaires discover that their wealth has insulated them so completely from reality that they no longer know their own children. This was the moment. She drove toward downtown, away from the exclusive zip codes where they lived, away from the manicured suburbs and private schools and country clubs. She drove toward a part of the city where the buildings were older, where the storefronts showed where the streets felt lived in rather than curated. She drove toward a community library, its brick facade faded, its entrance flanked by ancient oak trees that had probably stood there for 60 years. She pulled into the parking lot and got out. He watched her disappear around the corner of the building. He waited 30 seconds, then got out of his car as well, moving with the kind of deliberate quietness you employ when you don't want to be seen, when you're hunting something, when you're about to catch someone in the act. He rounded the corner of the library and found her sitting on the back steps, but she wasn't alone. Sitting beside her was a boy, maybe 16, maybe 17, wearing clothes that had been washed so many times they'd faded past the point of recovery. His backpack was held together with duct tape. His shoes, ancient, worn, their soles practically disintegrating, told a story of someone who couldn't afford new ones. His hair needed cutting. His shirt was missing a button. Everything about him screamed poverty the way his daughter screamed wealth, and he was explaining mathematics to his daughter on scrap paper with the patience of a saint. "Okay, so you see how the equation looks like this?" The boy's voice was gentle, measured, without a trace of condescension. "When you have two sides, they have to balance. Think of it like a scale. If I add 3 to this side, I have to add 3 to that side. Otherwise it tips, right? It tips and everything falls off." His daughter was leaning in, completely focused, completely engaged. And then, and this was the moment that landed like a punch to his sternum, she smiled. Not the polite smile she gave teachers, not the performance smile she deployed at school events, but a real smile. A smile that meant she understood. That meant something had clicked. That meant she was experiencing something pure and uncomplicated and absolutely absent from every other learning environment he'd purchased for her. "Oh," she said. "Oh my God, I've never thought about it that way. It actually makes sense." The boy smiled back. "Right? Once you see it as a balance, the rest just follows. You're going to crush this test." He stood there, hidden by the corner of the building, watching his billions become completely irrelevant, watching $3.2 million of failed intervention become utterly, humiliatingly meaningless, watching a boy in a falling-apart backpack do what Oxford tutors and Swiss institutes and summer programs and private jets could not do. And then his daughter said something that cracked open the real question, the one that had been hiding under all the others the entire time. "Why are you helping me? Like, seriously. You don't know me. You don't get anything out of this. Why?" The boy looked at her, and his answer was so simple, so utterly devoid of transaction or calculation, that it almost seemed absurd in a world built on optimization and ROI. "Because you looked lost," he said, "and nobody deserves to feel stupid." That was when he stepped out from behind the corner. The boy's face changed instantly. The gentleness evaporated. In its place came something harder, more defensive. The face of someone who'd learned young that when authority figures showed up, the outcome was rarely good. His daughter's face went pale. "Excuse me," he said, and his voice carried the weight of his position without him even trying. This was the voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Who exactly are you?" The boy stood slowly. He didn't run. He didn't fight. He just stood, facing down a billionaire in designer clothes with all the quiet dignity of someone who had nothing left to lose. "My name is Elijah. I'm helping your daughter study." "I can see that. The question is why? Is she paying you?" No, sir, she's not paying me anything." He moved closer, his tone shifting into interrogation mode, the same tone he used when he was trying to extract information from people who didn't want to give it. "Where do you go to school?" "I don't. Not anymore." "Why not?" The boy met his eyes. There was something unbreakable in that gaze, something that suggested this particular teenager had already weathered worse than a billionaire's suspicion. "My father died 2 years ago. My mother needed help with rent and bills. I got a job instead of going to school." The words landed. They didn't land like information. They landed like a judgment. They landed like a mirror being held up to his entire existence. Here was this boy, with nothing, working to keep his family alive and still finding time to sit on library steps and teach a stranger's daughter mathematics. Meanwhile, He'd spent millions trying to solve a problem that apparently didn't need solving the way he thought it did. "So you're not qualified to tutor her?" "No, sir, but I know math, and I know what it's like to feel lost. I think that matters more than qualifications." He wanted to argue. He wanted to demand references and credentials and proof of competency. He wanted to reduce this boy to a set of measurable statistics that he could evaluate and categorize and either accept or reject. But something in him, something that had been buried under years of boardroom meetings and acquisition strategies and the accumulated weight of always being the smartest person in the room, recognized truth when it was standing right in front of him. His daughter spoke up, her voice small but defiant. "He's been the best tutor I've ever had." He turned to look at her, and in that moment, he saw something that no amount of money had ever been able to purchase: actual education happening. Not the performance of education, not the checkbox version of education that existed in elite schools and fancy programs, but real, genuine, transformative learning, born from patience and empathy and the profound human desire to help someone else become less afraid of their own mind. He told Elijah, that he wanted to speak with him privately, not as a threat, as a request, but one that carried the weight of his position regardless. They walked away from his daughter, moving behind the library building, out of earshot. "I want you to tell me everything," he said, "and I want you to tell me the truth." So Elijah did. He told him about his father's death, about his mother working multiple jobs now, about his younger sister, about dropping out of school because there was no choice, because the alternative was homelessness, about spending his nights in the library, teaching himself everything he could, reading because reading was free and education was the only way out of the situation he was trapped in, about helping his sister, about helping the girl who looked lost in the hallway at the community center one day, and how teaching her had somehow made his own situation feel more bearable, because he was giving something, creating something, making something better instead of just surviving. By the time Elijah finished talking, something fundamental had shifted in his chest. It wasn't guilt exactly. It was something deeper than guilt. It was the recognition that he had been measuring the wrong things. He'd been optimizing for the wrong outcomes. He'd been solving for the wrong variables in an equation that he didn't actually understand. That night, he sat alone in his penthouse office. The city sprawled below him like a kingdom that suddenly felt completely foreign. He pulled up Elijah's information. He had his resources. He could find anything about anyone. And what he discovered broke something inside him that money had been holding together all these years. The boy was a straight-A student before his father died. His grades had collapsed in his senior year because he'd had to choose between school and survival. He was working 40 hours a week at a grocery store that paid minimum wage. His family was 3 months behind on rent. His mother's health was deteriorating from overwork. His sister needed glasses, but they couldn't afford them. And this boy was changing his daughter's life on the steps of a community library with scrap paper and the kind of infinite patience that couldn't be purchased at any price. $3.2 million. That was what he'd spent trying to save his daughter's academic life. $3.2 million in experts and programs and consultants and specialists. And the answer, when it finally came from a boy with nothing. A boy who had everything taken from him and had chosen to give anyway. He sat there until sunrise, asking himself a question that no business school had ever taught him how to answer. What if everything I've built, everything I've accumulated, everything I've optimized for has been solving for the wrong problem all along? What if the issue was never my daughter's intelligence at all? What if the issue was that nobody had ever simply seen her the way this boy with nothing had managed to see her? But the real question, the one that was going to determine everything that came next, was more dangerous than that. What happens when a man who's spent his entire life solving problems with money finally encounters a problem that requires something he's never learned how to give? The clock was ticking, because Elijah had no idea that he'd already changed one billionaire's life. But he was about to find out that sometimes being seen by the powerful is the most dangerous thing of all. Nay, what if the moment you stop trying to fix the world is the exact moment you finally become worthy of fixing it? The sun was rising over the city when he made the call, not to his lawyer, not to his accountant, not to any of the usual power brokers who inhabited his speed dial, but to his daughter. He asked her to come to his office before school, just the two of them. He didn't explain why, he just asked, and she said yes. When she arrived, still in her school uniform, still carrying the lightness that had become her new normal since meeting Elijah, he did something he hadn't done in years. He apologized, not the kind of apology that comes with conditions or asterisks or explanations, but a real one. The kind where you admit that you were wrong, that you didn't understand, that you measured the wrong things. "I followed you," he said, "last Friday. I was worried, and instead of asking you, instead of trusting you, I violated your privacy. I'm sorry for that. But I'm also grateful, because what I saw changed everything I thought I understood about helping someone." She looked at him with something between confusion and relief. "You saw Elijah." "Yes. And I saw something that no expert, no matter how expensive, has ever been able to give you. I saw someone who believed in you without trying to change you, someone who saw you as you are, not as something broken that needs fixing. That's what I couldn't buy. That's what I didn't know how to give." She started to cry, not from sadness, but from the recognition that her father had finally understood what she'd been trying to tell him all along, that she wasn't broken, that she just needed to be seen. He pulled her into his office chair beside him and asked her a question that seemed simple on the surface, but contained everything he'd learned in the past 72 hours. "What do you think Elijah needs?" She didn't answer immediately. Instead, she asked a question back. "Why do you want to know?" "Because," he said, "I want to help him, but I want to help him the right way this time. Not the way I helped you, which was wrong, but the way he's been helping you, which is to believe in who he already is." She told him everything, about how Elijah's mother was working herself to death, about how his sister needed medical attention that they couldn't afford, about how he'd turned down scholarships because he couldn't abandon his family to pursue his own education, about how sitting on those library steps, teaching anyone who would listen, was the only thing that made him feel like his life mattered. That afternoon, he had his team research Elijah's entire situation, not in the invasive way he'd researched his daughter's location, but in the constructive way. They found every detail of his financial struggle, his educational potential, his family's circumstances. What emerged was the profile of a young man who, despite having everything taken from him, had chosen to become someone who gives. And that, the billionaire finally understood, was a rarer quality than any degree or certification could ever represent. He didn't make his move immediately. Impatience was how he'd created most of his problems. Instead, he went back to the library. He sat on the steps and waited for Elijah to arrive. When the boy rounded the corner carrying his worn backpack and saw him there, his face shifted from confusion to something harder, something protective. "Is your daughter okay?" Elijah asked. And in that question was all the confirmation needed that this boy's priority wasn't himself, but the people he'd promised to help. "She's better than okay," he said. "She's happy, and that's because of you. Because you did something that I couldn't do despite spending millions trying. You saw her. You believed in her. You helped her become more of who she already is instead of trying to transform her into someone else. I came here to say thank you, and to ask if you'd be willing to let me help you the same way." Elijah's defensiveness cracked slightly. "I don't need your money, sir. I'm fine." "I know you are," he said. "You're more than fine. You're extraordinary. But your mother doesn't need to work 2 jobs. Your sister shouldn't have to go without medical attention, and you shouldn't have to choose between your family's survival and your own future. Let me help you change that." The offer came simply, not as a charity, but as recognition. Move into a guest house on his property, enroll in the best school in the city, let him cover the costs of education, of living, of all the things that had been stolen from Elijah by circumstance. In exchange, Elijah would do something that no amount of money could force anyone to do. He would remain himself. He would remain kind. He would remain the kind of person who sits on library steps and teaches strangers because they matter. Elijah cried. Not because he was ashamed, but because for the first time in his life, someone had looked at what he'd built with nothing and decided it was worth investing in. Someone had looked at his character and decided that his character mattered more than his circumstances. 3 weeks later, Elijah and his mother moved into the guest house. The transformation wasn't instantaneous or dramatic. There were no emotional airport scenes or montages set to inspirational music. Instead, there was the quiet, profound shift of a family beginning to believe that their situation could change. Elijah's mother reduced to one job. Then no jobs, focusing instead on her health for the first time in years. Elijah enrolled in school, where teachers quickly recognized what the billionaire had already understood. This was a young man capable of extraordinary things, held back only by circumstance, not by capacity. 1 year passed, then another. The billionaire didn't just help Elijah, he transformed his entire life. But more importantly, his daughter transformed too, not because she needed fixing, but because she finally had someone around her who modeled what it meant to have nothing and give everything anyway. She watched Elijah study late into the night, watched him help other students, watched him become the kind of person who elevated everyone around him simply by existing. And she became that too. But the real transformation wasn't in the children, it was in the billionaire himself. He began to understand that wealth wasn't about accumulation, it was about recognition. It wasn't about solving other people's problems by throwing money at them. It was about recognizing the value in people who were already solving their own problems and then getting out of their way while providing support. He started funding libraries, creating scholarship programs, building educational initiatives that didn't try to transform struggling students, but instead recognized the potential already inside them. On a quiet evening, the three of them sat together in the community library, the same library where everything had begun. Elijah was preparing for his university applications. His mother was there too, smiling in a way that suggested she was finally beginning to believe that her son's future was going to be different from his present. His daughter was helping Elijah organize his application materials, and somewhere in that small gesture was the entire lesson they'd all learned. The billionaire looked around at the books, at the worn furniture, at the space where everything had changed, and he realized something that no business school could have taught him. That the moment you stop trying to be the hero of everyone else's story is the moment you actually become heroic. That greatness isn't measured in dollars or achievements or conquests, but in the quiet recognition that some people are already great, and all they need is for someone to see it. "Thank you," he said to Elijah. Not because the boy had saved his daughter, but because Elijah had saved him from becoming a man who died, having won everything but understood nothing. Elijah smiled. "For what?" "For teaching me that the best investment I ever made wasn't a company or a building or a program. It was recognizing that you were already extraordinary. I just had to stop trying to fix you and start believing in you." And in that moment, in a worn library surrounded by free books and infinite possibilities, the real story ended. Not with money changing hands, not with problems solved, but with a man finally understanding that sometimes the greatest act of wealth is knowing when to stop spending it. Here's the question that's been haunting me since discovering this story. How many Elijahs are out there right now, sitting on library steps, teaching strangers, changing lives with nothing in their pockets, waiting for someone powerful enough to simply see them? And more importantly, what would change in your own life if you stopped trying to be the savior and started recognizing the people who are already saving themselves? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, who's the Elijah in your life? Who saw you when nobody else did? Because that's the kind of story that changes everything.